Hello children, I am your biology teacher. So in this session, we are going to discuss chapter number 8, nervous system. So first of all, we are going to start with the central nervous system or CNS. The central nervous system is considered as the supreme power of controlling all the bodily responses. It consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So first of all, we are going to discuss the human brain. Human brain is a highly developed organ. It is the uppermost part of the central nervous system. It is present in a hard bony box called cranium. The cranium protects the brain from any mechanical injury. Human brain is enveloped by three meninges: outer soft pyometer, middle thin arachnoid, and the inner tough durameter. The space between the meninges and the cavity of brain is filled with a clear fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. Meninges and cerebrospinal fluid both cushions the brain against the shocks. Now, what are the functions of brain? It receives the information from the receptor organs and sends them to the effector organs. It controls and regulates overall functioning of the body. It acts as the site of intelligence, memory, and reasoning. The human brain is divided into three main parts: cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. So first of all, we are going to discuss the cerebrum. It is the largest and the most complex part of the brain and accounts for 80% of the brain. It is divided into two cerebral hemispheres, right and left, and each cerebral hemisphere is joined by a sheet of thick fibers called corpus callosum. Corpus callosum acts as a medium for transfer of information between both the hemispheres. So this is the function of corpus callosum, that it is acting as a medium for the transfer of information between the two hemispheres. Cerebrum is folded structure and the folds are called the gyri. In the diagram, it is clearly visible, gyri and sulci. Depressions between them are called the sulci. And they both, gyri and sulci, increases the surface area to accommodate more nerve cells. What are the functions of cerebrum? It helps to observe things around us through sensory organs. Second, it controls thinking, memorizing, reasoning, and intelligence. It controls vision, hearing, mood, emotion, and speech. So these are the functions of cerebrum. Now we are coming on to the second part of the brain, that is cerebellum. It is a region lying at the back of the head under the cerebrum. So this is the location of cerebellum, that it is lying at the back of the head under the cerebrum. It is second largest part of the brain. What are its functions? Number one, it controls the posture and balance of the body. It coordinates the muscles during locomotion. Medulla oblongata, third part of the brain, extending down from the center portion of the brain. It is the posterior most part of the brain which continues with the spinal cord. Functions of medulla oblongata. It controls the involuntary responses such as breathing, heartbeat, and swallowing. Involuntary actions are those which are going automatically in our body, and voluntary actions are those which we are doing according to our will. So medulla oblongata function is to control all the involuntary actions in our body. Then second function is the secretion of some glands are also controlled by medulla oblongata. After that, we are coming on to the spinal cord. Spinal cord, it is extending down from the medulla oblongata and it comes out from the foramen magnum. Foramen magnum is the large oval opening at the occipital bone of the skull. Then, like the brain, as in the brain, I told you that the covering of the brain is the meninges. In the same way, in the spinal cord also, like the brain, it is also protected by meninges and runs along the vertebral column. In spinal cord, two similar have fused together and form a small canal called central canal. You can see in the diagram, central canal. And this canal is filled with a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. Earlier also I told you that cerebrospinal fluid is in the brain. Inner part of the spinal cord is made up of gray matter, which consists of cell body and neurons. So please pay more attention here. The inner part of the spinal cord is made up of gray matter. And in the gray matter, the cell bodies are present. Outer part is made up of white matter. Each side of the spinal cord are two horns, the dorsal horn and the ventral horn. In the diagram, you can see both dorsal horn and ventral horn. Spinal cord is the center of reflex actions. Function of spinal cord: it acts as a center of processing reflex actions. It conducts sensory and motor impulses to and away from the brain. Now we are coming on to the reflex actions. What are reflex actions? So a quick response which does not need the involvement of the brain. This is called a reflex action. It is defined as a quick, spontaneous, mechanical response towards the stimulus. The nervous pathway involved in a reflex action is called a reflex arc. So reflex actions are rapid and happen spontaneously without thinking. For example, you would pull your hand away from a hot flame without thinking about it. If we are unknowingly touch a hot object, the heat is sensed by the heat receptor in our hand. These receptors start an impulse in the sensory neuron, which transmit the message to the spinal cord. The impulse is passed via association neuron to the motor neuron. The motor neuron passes the impulse to a muscle of our arm. The muscle of the arm is the effector organ because it shows the response to the stimulus. Now, in the end, we are coming on to the Pavlovs experiment. So there are two types of reflexes. Number one is the natural reflex, and the other one is the conditional reflex. Natural reflex is one in which no previous experience or learning is required, like blinking, coughing, sneezing. These are naturally going on in our body. Conditional reflex is one which develops during lifetime due to experience or learning. So Pavlov's experiment is the example of a conditioned reflex. What happens in this Pavlov's experiment? The famous Russian biologist noted that under normal conditions, no animal will secrete saliva in response to the ringing of a bell or any other sound. But when a bell was repeatedly sounded simultaneously with the presentation of food during an adequate period of training, the dog salivated at the sound of the bell even when there was no food at that time. So in this diagram, the first picture, you can see that the dog is salivating when the food is given to the dog. In the second experiment, you can see when the bell rings, no salivation occurs from the dog. But when the bell and the food presented together, the dog salivated. And afterwards, when only the bell rang, no food is there, even then the salivation occurs from the dog. So this is the conditioned reflex, and conditioned reflex developed due to the previous experience. So children, go through these topics, learn all the topics, and do the exercise question which is given at the back of the lesson.